guys. Day frickin' 2. How y'all feeling in this heat? Don't you love being sweaty? That's the only reason why I wear this hat, so I can go like this every so often. It's nice. So again, my name is Quasi. Founder of the Psychedelic Society of Western New York. Done some interesting work with psychedelic harm reduction and some psychedelic storytelling. I've been collecting some stories from around the world, and last night, for whoever was here, we did a really nice psychedelic open mic night, and we were able to hold space of support for people who were continually integrating some of their experiences. And who was here last night? Round of applause. Oh, a decent amount of people. Awesome. It's good to see you guys here. And so today we're going to be doing a little panel on the politics of psychedelia. And so the premise of this panel is essentially, there are a lot of conversations that are had. First off, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome.
Back and forth, off and on.
Back and forth, off and on. Let me hold this straight. How's that? Is that better? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, a lot of conversations that are had in the hallways of psychedelic conferences, after talks that I think are really important to bring up to the stage. And I'm going to ask just a few questions to our panelists here, and then maybe open it up to you guys if you have some time to ask your own questions. And so really quickly, I'll let them do very brief introductions of themselves. But we have Kilindi, who spoke yesterday on mushrooms, the mycelium crypto wallet, and Bitcoin as psychedelic transdimensional currency. It's a mouthful.
All right, thank you for being out this afternoon. Came from Detroit, Michigan to share some of the few things that I know about psychedelia, and I'm here to serve the community.
Thank you. And so we have Lori, who spoke on PTSD and MDMA therapy.
Yeah, I'm from New Orleans. I'm just so grateful to be here. Thank you guys for being such a receptive audience last night and today. And it's an honor to sit up here with everybody else. I'm excited to talk with them. So thank you.
We've got Anna, who spoke on preparing for a powerful trip, how mastery of letting go helps you move on.
Hi, everybody. I'm from Ashland, Oregon, and I do work with forgiveness as a healing modality, expanded forgiveness. And also, I'm an addiction recovery coach, so I help people. Sometimes they're working with plant medicines. Great to be here.
And lastly, we've got Brad, who spoke on the dark side of psychedelics, men behaving badly and what to do about it.
Hello again, it's an honor to be here, and I'm just here to support the community and learn new things and meet new people, so thank you.
So a round of applause for our panelists. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. None of these guys have any idea what I'm going to ask them, so this should be fun. So, first question. With the growing distrust in for-profit corporate behaviors seen in the psychedelic space, namely with Compass attempting to patent psilocybin for depression, how do you guys think money, power, and capitalism combine with the advancement of psychedelic medicine, and do you feel like there are ways that it needs to be mitigated? And so we can just popcorn, and whoever has any thoughts can go ahead and speak.
Well, definitely there needs to be something done about it, because we cannot trust people to regulate themselves, especially people motivated by, if they have greed in mind, if they have power in mind, then regulation is a good thing. I know there's a big trend towards deregulation in a lot of different fields, and to some extent that's good, but in this case I don't think it's a good thing. I think we do need watchdogs and people, checks and balances, because part of human nature is very greedy and very power hungry and egocentric, and a lot of times that's the motivation to start these companies, and unfortunately that's just the reality of the situation. Wish it was different, but I for one don't trust a lot of people as far as I could throw them. So and I think that hopefully that'll change someday, but right now I think we just need to be realistic and sober about this.
I would echo some of what you said, Brad, and I just want to give a shout out to everybody who's growing and in small underground way, because we're going to need you to keep going, to keep providing medicines for the people. And so I think that's going to be a big counterbalance to whatever happens, is to make sure that we support our independent growers and providers. So that's what I have to add.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to agree with what both the other panelists have said. I'm interested to see what will happen even when we take a look at it with this capitalist model. Because I'm in the South, where there are a lot of people who are still being daily incarcerated for their use of substances that in other areas they are not targeted as much for. So I'm interested to see if we can allow others to keep growing these mushrooms, if within communities we can build structures so that as these substances become decriminalized, maybe even through the capitalist channels, people can then safely use them without the fear of persecution.
Well, I think it's kind of like an agenda with regulation of the fox guarding the hen house, because the government, who many of us look to regulate the corporations, are the major stockholders in the corporations and benefit either way it goes. I'm a person who believes that the market will find its own level, that there will be times that things will be difficult. It's just like the 60s. Many people malign the 60s because things got a little precarious there, but with any birth you have some things that may not be very comfortable, but ultimately the baby that comes forth from that is something that you love and cherish. I don't think these people have the capacity to be able to regulate a thing that should be unregulatable. Just like we talked about Timothy Leary, but without Timothy Leary, many of us wouldn't be here, because he gave LSD to Mary Pinchot Meyer, who was the principal mistress of John F. Kennedy. Of his 36 women other than Jackie, she was his go-to girl because she didn't mind doing threesomes and foursomes in the Oval Office. She gave LSD to John F. Kennedy while they were snorting cocaine, smoking bud, and dropping acid in the White House. That's what brought his escalation of the Cuban Missile Crisis down. So actually, Timothy Leary, by giving it to Mary Pinchot Meyer, saved us from nuclear proliferation with the Russians when they went to Cuba. So I think that the market will regulate itself. It's been in stealth mode for 40 years, and I think that it will regulate itself without regulation of people who benefit from the regulation.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Brett, did you have something to add?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. So I think that is, a really good segue into this next question, because certainly there are a lot of issues that we're going to be dealing with capitalism and the medicalization of psychedelics, but certainly there are a lot of benefits to it, right? And now that we have places like Oakland and Denver that have decriminalized psychedelics, what are the pros and cons of the decriminalization versus the pros and cons of medicalization? And how do we see these coinciding with each other?
Well, the only thing that comes up for me after that question, can you ask the question again?
Sure. So in decriminalization, we're going to have therapists who are coming into their own right and holding space for their community members. But alongside this, we have this medicalized model of the research being done with psychedelics. And so with psilocybin, for example, being now decriminalized in Oakland and Denver, we know that people are going to be using these as healing modalities for people. And so this is happening alongside the medicalization of something like psilocybin. So where do you see the pros and cons of the decriminalized model versus the medicalized model?
I think they're going together. So I don't see it as a versus kind of thing, but I do see that what we need is more and more people to be trained up, to hold space for more and more people to be receiving the medicines. So what I want to see is trainings that are not thousands and thousands of dollars to get into. So I would love to see, nonprofit training organizations to make sure that people are well trained, that there's quality, but that it doesn't take years and it doesn't take thousands and thousands of dollars and people going into debt over getting trained up. So that's where I see, when we decriminalize and we have the medical strength of the research behind us, then the next step is everybody that feels called to it. Well, we don't just go, oh, I'm ready, let me do it, and then, but we don't want to have, oh, it's going to take years, and by the way, it's going to cost $20,000, and there's got to be some kind of middle ground where we get well trained, but it's available to a lot of people to come into this space.
As someone who's definitely benefited personally from the medical model, I think that the bonuses or pros to the medical model is that there's a system of checks and balances there that allows to make sure, since there is a protocol and there's a training, and for instance, when I was in the study, everything was recorded. So there is, not that I think that should happen for everybody, obviously, but there is a sense that there is some standards of operation that should be across the board, and hopefully that will cut down on any type of abuse in these situations. Obviously, I think the huge con is the cost. And I think that's something that most people within the psychedelic community, even those, especially at MAPS, are really trying to consider and trying to figure out ways that we can cut down on the cost of these services, because it really does disallow a lot of people to have access to them. As far as decriminalization, I think the pro is that obviously I want to see less people afraid of using these substances. I think the con is that we will probably end up with a lot of spiritual narcissists in a lot of areas, which happens oftentimes because people feel called to this, but just as you were saying, they're not necessarily ready to lead a group or to lead several people using these substances. And these substances should be respected for what they can do, and that's my big fear with the decriminalization. But in reality, I'm more for medicalization and decriminalization if it gives more access to people who need these medicines.
Well, the medical model is a necessary part of this thing, but I believe that the medical part of it is the sidebar, not the so-called clandestine 16-year-old in his basement growing mushrooms. His mother calling down, Harry, what are you doing? I'm growing mushrooms, Mom. I think that's the future of this thing. I think the medical industry has this agenda to control, and I utilize the computer model. Where would we be in home computers, just your regular computer at home, be it Apple or Windows or whatever, if you had to go to classes to learn how to do your computer? You'd still be trying to get on Facebook, because the way we learned was you got a computer and you went there and you started pushing buttons, you found out how to turn it on and things like that. You didn't go to school to learn how to use a computer. Now, I'm not talking about coders or anything like that. I'm just talking about a regular person who uses a computer. And the same thing with entheogens. This will flourish in our community, and there will be losses inside of this thing. But you can't want what the rain gives without the thunder and lightning coming. The problem with the Western society is that they want everything free and without any difficulty, without any work. You want it handed to you. And psychedelics is not going to do that. It's a chaotic way of dealing with this, but we have to go through it. And I think that the decriminalization is a first step. Once it's countrywide and people can utilize themselves, learn how to grow themselves, learn how to identify themselves and things like that, rather than going to 101 and paying $10,000 to do it. If you get a computer and you mess with it, you'll learn how to use it. You get some mushrooms, you mess with it, you'll learn how to use them. Because we've had a model where we had we didn't deal with MAPS or with Hefner Institute or anything like that. We had crackheads in the community. The one that when it comes to Thanksgiving dinner, you put a sitter on him. Watch Junebug. Don't let him go upstairs where the jewelry and the money is, because he's going to take it. If he takes your car out in the morning he's going to sell your car at the crack house before he gets back. And we've taken people who were crackheads, give them 7 grams of mushrooms, put them in the basement, make sure they don't tear nothing up, and they've come out of it better for it. But once we start to, the official where, and some people need this, that's why I said the medical part of it is part of it. But some people need the eye mask and Beethoven playing in the background and somebody holding their hand saying, oh, are you okay, and things like that. But then there's a place for, hey, we're gonna give you the mushrooms and lock you in the basement, and when you come up, are you ready to come upstairs now? If you're not, well, we're gonna give you some more mushrooms, and when you're ready to come up, you can be like that. That's why I never speak in maps.
So I agree with everything that's said, and I think decriminalization is a great thing. Has a little bit of things we need to be worried about, but I think for most of it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I love seeing it popcorning across this country, and state to state, city to city. I just want to say a little bit of word of caution about the field of medicine in this country, and as we all know, there's hugely problematic, not just for access and money, but also just in terms of simple things like you look at Schedule 1, for instance. Marijuana is Schedule 1, mushrooms are on Schedule 1, tobacco, which kills more people than all these other things combined. A lot of these things combined is not even scheduled. Same thing with alcohol. So there's so much craziness in the system that we're going to see a lot of craziness with these things being decriminalized and things going into medicalization. And we're already seeing it in terms of esketamine and people making these minor changes, molecular changes on things just so they can turn a profit. There's no good reason why we need esketamine when we have ketamine. It's all profit driven. And things like Marinol. It's extremely expensive, and people can. It's a weed growing out in nature that's free to all of us. What lunacy to create something new in a laboratory just so you can turn a huge profit on it. So I see a lot more of that. I think we need to be mindful of that and be willing to go to bat to see that things don't get corrupted, don't get distorted as much as some people would like to, because big pharma is it's a double-edged sword. I know there's some good that comes out of it, a lot of good that comes out of it, but the negative side is something that's very scary. That it's a huge industry in this country, and it's something that needs to be more well regulated. And again, not to harp too much on this administration, but it's the fox guarding the hen house, and we're not seeing a lot of oversight for this process. So we need to be very, very mindful and keep our eyes open as this becomes more and more medicalized.
Thank you. And so whether we're medicalizing or we're decriminalizing, there are certainly people in indigenous cultures who have a certain view of sort of this mainstreaming of psychedelics. We're seeing this boom in ayahuasca tourism. We're seeing these high-tech business executives who are microdosing to advance their capitalist ideals. And so I'm curious to hear from you guys, what do you think about the idea that we are commodifying the sacred?
Well, if any of you were here yesterday to hear my talk, I talked about stripping down and letting go. And I think we have to do that on so many levels so that the conditioning that we received when we grew up, if we did grow up in this kind of culture, then we can take it off so that we even know how to hold something as sacred. For most of us, that's actually kind of new. I know I didn't grow up with that, and I had to learn it for myself. So the more that we can do that with each other, the more we'll be able to then be very, very aware of who actually began the sacred ceremonies, where are these people, how are we supporting them. One example is with the iboga plant, and I had mentioned about the sustainability issue, and that there is a group called Blessings of the Forest where the main guy who's in Gabon suggests that before anybody does any kind of iboga journey, that person make a donation back to Gabon. So those are the kinds of ways that we can be more aware of how to be in sacred reciprocity with the original peoples who are offering their medicines to us. So got to remember some gratitude.
Well, I think that you can try to commodify the sacred, but you will be gone before the sacred is gone. It's a thing where the people who started with these things, they weren't chasing them, they were in their environment. And as these things are now including themselves into our environment, we have to find a way in modern terms to be able to deal with the consequences, to be able to deal with the gifts and the takeaways that come along with being able to deal with these very, very powerful compounds in a respectful manner, so that we don't be put in a position to where it breaks everything down. Money is a driving force because the society has been set up that people need money. I don't think that fair money or fair trade is a negative thing inside of this. I think that people have to, if you're an Okomfo, or if you are a Babalawo, these are proper names given to the spiritual people in Ghana and also Nigeria. They aren't shamans. The imposition of shaman on everybody who's not a priest, rabbi, or imam is a disrespectful tactic created by psychology and anthropologists because they were too lazy to do and put the proper names of what people are, because they had no respect for so-called primitive cultures. So they are maybe not paid in money, but they're given cola nuts, or they're given snaps, or they're given something, or they're given food to be able to sustain themselves because they have to eat also. So people who are utilizing money, well, you know, now we're going to start utilizing Bitcoin, but you know, should be fairly compensated for their work and energy that they put into what they're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. But for large corporations to come in and to create new compounds, take compounds, make them legal, illegal, free or not free, is not really the paradigm that we want to do. We want people to be able to have access to these things the way that the people in other cultures who have it readily available can, you know, have it available to themselves. So the same thing with us, to have it available. It should be just about free, you know, because it's one of our birthrights to be able to utilize these things, because this is what's going to take us to the next levels of the human, out of the human into the transhuman, out of the transhuman into the unimaginable. And that's really what I'm looking for. It starts with a healing, because the West needs healing. It's sick, shown by the leader of the West. Many people don't agree with that, but the man is sick. He needs a healing. He needs to be taken somewhere and given some mushrooms or some MDMA or something like that. In the basement. So the healing can take place, and then ultimately, once the healing is taking place, then we can move on to greater things in the multiverse and the interparticle realms of existence, and into the transdimensional, extradimensional, hyperdimensional realms of the existence of the universe.
With most of my dealings being with MDMA, I don't necessarily have the same impact of a cultural history in the same way. But I would think something that Brad had spoke about earlier, with just these idea of councils and people really within this movement, I think most of us want to practice with those who are authentic and are really respecting the lineage of these medicines and are doing so in a way that is about sustainability of these cultures as well. And I would hope that that is where a lot of our energy goes to. So those who are co-opting it or abusing it they don't last very long.
this is a little bit tangential to the question, but that's an interesting point. Some of you might be aware of Jordi Riba in Spain, but it's very difficult to do ayahuasca research. Part of the reason why is because it's hard to get a handle on the dose, know how much you're giving, because if you interview everyone in the ceremony, get this big batch of brew, and it can be various levels of strength. So he figured out a way of freeze drying the ayahuasca, encapsulating them, testing the capsules, then you have a pretty good measure of the dose. So a lot of the research he did with it was completely stripping it from its cultural backgrounds. So there's no shaman, no Icaros. It's in a stale hospital environment. The person's given a pill by a white coat. I don't know if they wear a white coat. They might do a little bit more than that. But you know what I'm talking about, right? It's stripped from the where it originated, and he got some compelling results. Maybe not quite as compelling as someone going down to the Amazon, but compelling results. And so I struggle with this and thinking, God, part of me it hurts to see it medicalized and turned into, taken from its origins and put in this thing for Western consumption. But on the other hand, not a lot of people here might not be willing to go down to Peru and doing all that sort of stuff. They're used to the medical model where they get a pill, for better or worse, to cure their ails. And so I think it's a double-edged sword. It's not a black and white issue. There's a lot of areas of gray in there. I think there's good parts and bad parts to a lot of what we're talking about here. But so I think it's just important to keep that in mind. Is that things might seem black and white, might seem like it's all good or all bad, but again, it's always a mixture, and which I think I just want to make that point.
Thank you. So definitely within the psychedelic realm, things are going to be black and white, and I think that things are always going to be black and white on a lot of other political and social movements that are going on. And so with that said, psychedelics have always coincided with different social justice movements, looking at the anti-war sentiments back in the 60s and with the Summer of Love. And, there are a lot of things that are happening today, especially with the administration that we're living in. And so my question to you guys is, in what ways do you think the psychedelic community is in support of these social justice movements that are occurring? And in what ways can we do better?
No, you're. I always think of this line. You always have to start.
I'm just holding the mic. I'm quiet here for a minute because I'm just collecting my thoughts. This is really important to me, and I feel like we can do a whole lot better. I know I can do better as far as how much of my time and energy am I utilizing for the greater good, and I just feel like there's a way in which we can use these medicines for our own personal healing and then call it good and go, oh, I'm good now. But then that's not the whole story. Who I am is every being on the planet, and the planet herself. So I really welcome, and I take this on myself, is for us to just go a whole lot deeper. In this country, people have gotten really, really cozy on our couches, just kind of hanging out. And we don't have time for that anymore. So we need to wake ourselves up in a really big way. And I love the fact that we're a community and we're exploring our inner nature. So let's bring that down and make a difference here.
We still have to realize that we're in the infancy of this thing. It's not been that long. I don't know how long this map's been going on. How many studies have they done? A couple of thousand, a few thousand. We're just in the beginning of this, so we can't be too hard on ourselves, but yes, we can do more. The fragrance of how we look at this whole space that we're in, we had a 40-year hiccup. It's just been a couple of years. Most people haven't done the things that they need to do as far as even looking at which compounds they want to ingest, or a sufficient dose of those compounds, or how they're going to get it, or who they're getting it for. It's so early and so new. We have to be, we have to be careful not to think we're further along than we are. We need people like you who are in the vanguard of this to spread the positive news, and also say that it's not all bubbles and roses and peach ice cream. We're all here learning. We all have to suppress the ego and be able to learn from one another. You learn more really just talking with people who are in the spaces and things like that, making new alliances, new friends. So this is a very, very new movement. I think the movement that we're looking at to support came out of the movements of the psychedelics during the 60s. Nobody cared nothing about no tree before they had LSD and psilocybin. Tree, you cut a tree down and you make a desk out of it. But when the summer of love came and people had LSD, the next thing you know, they're out in the forest standing in front of the bulldozers hugging trees. People sitting in trees for 6 months so they can't knock the tree down. Nobody did that in the 1950s. Nobody during the Korean War was taking flowers and sticking them in the barrels of guns. There was no gay movement before the 1960s. People hid in the closet. Women married to men for 40 and 50 years. Men married to women for 40 and 50 years, suppressing what they felt, not going out doing what they wanted to do. But when LSD and mushrooms and things like that came, it was like, here I am. So we have to understand that this is a very new movement that was short-circuited, that is now re-emerging, and as we embrace this new thing that's very new in the West, it's part of the Western tradition before coming to the Americas, but the West, the modern West, is a very new movement, and we have to look at where we are, embrace it on an individual level and on a collective level. Because if you, I can go Christian on you, let your little light shine, don't take your candle and stick it in the closet, put it up so it can light the way. So we have to be positive. We have to start learning to be able to pass this information on in a coherent manner where people who aren't part of this space, who still think it's crazy, who are stuck in the 1950s or 60s or the 2019s under the Trump administration, we have to learn to not be so hard on ourselves and relax and take high doses.
Yeah!
I think that what these substances can do is it can help us remove ourselves from this idea of binary thinking and really connect us to one another. And I think that's a beautiful thing when we see the oneness in all of us. And I think as far as how we can work better, harder, make things more cohesive is within our own communities. If we can go out and start educating and making sure that there's an accessibility issue for everyone in our community, and also offering integration for those who are already using these substances and guidance, and build within that, build our own framework. I think that's where a lot of this we need to reach out within our own communities. If everybody here went home, I'm assuming it's people from other places as well, and worked within their communities, I think we would see more change.
I agree with everything that's said. The only thing I wanted to add is it is a pretty young movement, and I agree that things are similar and different than they were in the 60s. I mean, in the 60s, with the Vietnam War, and then it seemed like these entheogens were waking people up to the fact that this needs to be stopped. So there was a big cause for the government to worry because there's a huge growing populace that's opposing them. And I think that it's different now. I mean, we have that to a certain extent, but there's not like a huge hippie movement where we're doing that kind of thing. So I'm a little bit, I'm on both sides of this a little bit. I think in one sense, since it's so young, we need to protect it and not be too outlandish or too, I'm not sure what the right word is, bold about it, as to cause undue attention to maybe shut it down. On the other hand, I think the stakes are so high right now that we need to get more active. We need to get off of the grandstands and get onto the field and participate. And so it's a paradox, and see both sides of it. Right now I'm leaning more towards getting more politically active. I think we need to get more vocal, and maybe not tying the psychedelic movement to a particular one view or another, but just becoming more politically active based on the gains that you got from your own experiences. A lot of people get a lot of what's called biophilia. I think Dennis McKenna talks a lot about that in terms of people awakening to the fact that we're poisoning the earth. They have more of a connection with the environment and seeing a need to stop the pollution. And it's very dire. So I think we need to have a nice balancing point where we're active but not too outlandish with it. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
So the one more thing to add to me is that as we do these practices, and they're not only entheogenic practices, right? We're not tripping all the time. So our daily practices that bring us into alignment with the one spirit, then what we're doing is we're strengthening our intuition. So when we as a community get better and better at listening inside, Spirit will place us where we need to be for our service. And we don't necessarily need to be talking about entheogens when we get there. We just go and we serve in whatever way we're guided to do so. So I think that's one way to say, all right, yeah, I'm going to be more active. Show me what to do, and I'm there. I'm ready.
So certainly, I really aligned with the idea of change yourself, you change the world, right? And I think that's a lot of what's happening within the psychedelic community, emerging within these other social justice movements. And we're all along a spectrum there, right? And we're all finding our place in all of that. And so I really want to thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on that. We only have about 10 minutes left, and so I definitely wanted to open it up to a few questions for you guys. So if anybody's got any questions.
I would love to hear the panel riff on the differences and the impacts of decriminalization of something that's been prohibited between that and legalization. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two different ways of things becoming mainstream.
As opposed to the two, I am. I think that you can't criminalize plants, and as long as we use the jargon of the people who are trying to suppress and control, we will have a more difficult time. So there's really no such thing as decriminalization of the things that are from the earth. It is a changing of consciousness to understand that these things are free and usable by any human being because they are our sole right to be able to have a relationship with these very, very powerful sacred plants and compounds that grow on the earth. You can no more criminalize cannabis as you can spinach, or broccoli or any other plant that grows. So my view on it is that you make many small moves, small increments, and ultimately it changes the mindset of people, because now it's even in the infancy of the cannabis movement inculcating itself into different states and things like that. It's becoming a non-issue. In Detroit, we have medical cannabis, and we have recreational cannabis. And when recreational cannabis came in, they thought the world was going to end in the city of Detroit, and it didn't. They thought people would be riding down the streets with 2-foot spliffs and, playing music, rocking and things like that. It didn't happen. It's becoming a non-issue, that the police are, they're just walking past it. They'll get you for something else, but they're not worried about cannabis the way it was 10, 15 years ago. I know people who went to jail for 20 and 25 years for having, some cannabis in the trunk. So these things are changing, but as far as decriminalization, legalization, they both have their problems. but they also have their upsides also.
I guess for the shorter answer, as a proponent for cognitive liberty, I would be in the camp of legalization of these substances. I also think legalization of these substances would completely change the criminal justice system in the United States, which, in my opinion, deeply needs to be changed. Yeah. And I guess what I have to offer is that just like the criminal justice system itself, I think there are other places on the planet where people and nations are doing a good job. I mean, it would be great to research some of those places and say, oh, okay. I mean, this whole United States first thing is just so misguided, and there are nations that are doing some really interesting things. So I, for one, I have not done that research, but I'm interested. So yeah, there's some places that are way ahead of us, so we need to learn from them.
Yeah, just to reframe what everyone else has said, yeah, legalized, nature should be legal. There shouldn't be any government, anyone telling us what we can do with our bodies or our minds, as long as we're not hurting anyone else. But decriminalization might be a necessary stepping stone to that process, so they might both be necessary, but none of this stuff should be illegal.
And so, unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but I really do want to thank the panelists. I hope that you guys all continue these conversations amongst each other. That's where a lot of the magic is, and having, being at these places with all of these bright minds amongst yourselves and amongst the people here. And so I want you to continue these conversations and take them out into the world with you and see how we can together change the story and change the world around the culture of psychedelics. So I just want to give it up for our panelists.